Hi, this is Professor Scott Norman, and we are at Pittsburgh State University, and today we are in the Automatic Transmission Laboratory. And we are talking about compressors today, and we have a compressor that we are replacing. And so this is the used compressor that had a input shaft seal leak, so we're replacing it with a new compressor. And I wanted to talk to my students a little bit about compressor replacement. And when you go and you get a new compressor or a reman compressor, what are some of the things you should check with it? There's a lot of confusion out there as far as the amount of oil that you put in the new compressor, and so I wanted to make sure that that everyone understands the proper procedures that need to be done, because it is a little confusing when you start looking at the service information and starting to see what needs to be done. Again, there's a lot of different ideas on what need to be done, and so we want to make sure you do it correctly. The first thing I like to do with the new compressor, even when I'm going to the parts store to get it, because sometimes you get a new one, sometimes you get a reman one, and you may not be going to the dealership. Again, you may be going to a local parts store. I want to be able to, obviously do a visual inspection on it, make sure that it is the right one. On this particular compressor, it has a manifold on it. This is a 10 PA17 nip and nizzle compressor, so it's a swash plate dual acting 10 piston compressor, but it has a manifold on the top of it that has the service ports on it. It also has the high pressure relief valve on it that you have to physically swap over to the new compressor. But I want to make sure that I'm able to turn it. There's more than one time I've gone to the parts store and I've taken a compressor and I physically cannot turn it with my hand. And of course, here's the used one, and I can turn this fairly easy. Make sure that the pulley is good and it's not bearings going out or anything like that. Well, this one's really hard to turn, and so if it is really hard to turn, I tell the parts store, hey, give me a wrench and let's pop off this plate real quick and let's make sure it's turnable, because I've actually they tried to sell me a compressor that was locked up more than once, and I just heard the pressure relief on that right now. So now if I take it and turn it, I'm able to turn this thing a lot easier. So I was just building up pressure in the system is all I was, and I wasn't able to turn it. And so now I'm able to turn it by hand. Again, if you can't turn a compressor by hand, don't buy it, buy something else. Say, I want a different one. Okay. So again, do all your visual inspection on it, make sure that the bearing and the pulley is working okay on this. When I bought this compressor, I'm gonna go ahead and talk and continue to undo this plate, is that it does come with instructions, and so they have a nice instruction on it, that a nice 4 or 5 page instruction, but it did have a sticker on the compressor that said, I lost my sticker, but it had a sticker on the top of it that said that it had 3 ounces of oil in it. Now, I've bought compressors that have a set amount of oil in it, let's say 3 ounces. I bought compressors that had 0 amount of oil in it, and then I bought compressors that have the full system charge in it, which in this particular system is 5 ounces of oil. And so why the difference? Well, when I was working for Chrysler Corporation, and I did a lot of air conditioning classes with Chrysler technicians, they told us that at the factory, when they are building a vehicle, they'll put the total system charge of oil in the compressor. So no other components will have oil in it. And then so when you first turn on that AC system, all the oil in the compressor is then going to circulate that oil through the entire system. And so when you buy a brand new compressor, that new compressor doesn't know if it's going on a new vehicle, if it's going to a dealership or a parts store. And so a new compressor typically will sometimes have total system oil all in it already. And so at that point, if the system holds 5 ounces of oil, and I have 5 ounces of oil in this new compressor, and I don't do anything about that, I'm probably overcharging the system with oil. I'm putting too much oil in it, and so that's something that is an issue. And so this particular unit has 2 ports. The smaller port is going to be the suction port. The larger port right here is the discharge port. And so I should be able to get the oil. Again, the suction port goes down into the sump of the compressor where that swash place is, in the very center of that, and so I should be able to get the oil out of that port there. So what I do is I typically get, some type of jelly jar or something like that. I'm gonna reach over here, and a lot of technicians will use some type of measuring cup or something like that. The problem with these is that, my first reading is 100 milliliters. And so, I may not get 100 milliliters out of this, and so the key is that I want to get something that is a little bit more accurate. This is fine, but I want something a little bit more accurate. So teaching fuel classes, I have a whole bunch of beakers laying around. So if I get a beaker that, starts off at 25 milliliters, it's a little bit easier to take a measurement. And so, but I have something rigged up here where I'm able to hold the compressor up, and I'm able to turn it up and kind of rest it on there. See if I can get that oil out of it. And you can see the oil coming out right now. And so, you gotta sit here and you gotta hold this compressor for just a little bit, so it can get a little tiring. And you do want to kind of move it around, so up and down. And so I'm checking this to make sure that it has the right amount of oil on it. And so again, sometimes it's higher. I like having a sticker on it, but sometimes that sticker is a little bit off. And so I'm going back and forth, trying to get all that oil out of it. It is a little messy sometimes. And the oil does come out pretty quick, so this isn't something that you should take more than 5 minutes with. Turning the input shaft. Trying not to get oil all over my connector there. Okay, so when we take a look at this, see what we have. I have 50, looks like I have 100, looks like 100 milliliters of oil is what that is. And so 1 ounce is 30 milliliters, so 2 ounces would be 60, 3 ounces would be 90. So again, looks like we're right about 100. Make sure I get the right number. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little bit more accurate than normal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour it into this nice little beaker that will actually, I could count out, 10 milliliters, 20 milliliters, and so forth. So I could see much more accurately. So if you do have something that's not very accurate, you can maybe put it in this right here and see what we come up with. So again, it said 3 ounces. 3 ounces of oil, which is 90 milliliters. And right now I got, looks like 55. So again, that's a lot more accurate way. I can see it a lot better on that. So 55 is definitely not 90. What I'll do is I'll try to get a little bit more out. So 90, so 55 is, almost 2 ounces, 60. See, not much more oil is coming out of here. I try to go back and forth a little bit. Maybe I'll go this way. There we go. We got some coming out of the discharge port. We got a little more coming out now. That was a few more ounces, but that wasn't 30, that's for sure. So we'll put all of it in. Okay, and so I got right at 65 milliliters, so that's a little bit over 2 ounces of oil. The next step in this process would be then to take the cover off the old compressor and see how much oil is in the old compressor, and that's pretty important. Is there 1 ounce in there? Is there nothing? Is there 5 ounces of oil in it? So that tells a lot about the system, depending upon what type of oil, how much oil is in the original compressor. There is something I do want to add while I'm talking about, while I'm taking this cover off, is that there's, when I talk about compressors, there's in recent years, there's been oil separators that have been added to compressors. So we're used to, putting 5 ounces of oil in, 7 ounces of oil in, maybe, at the upper amount, 9 ounces of oil in. And those were a system that, had, 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of refrigerant, maybe 2.5 pounds of refrigerant, if it's a rear system. And so we typically say, there's like a 20-25% rule of how much oil versus refrigerant ratio. And so this particular unit is 1.56 pounds of refrigerant. So that's roughly around 25 ounces of R134A refrigerant. And so the total system capacity is 5 ounces. And so if you do the math on that, and well, that's around 20% oil versus refrigerant capacity. And again, that's about a rule of thumb. So somewhere between 20 to 25%. The newer compressors have oil separators in them, and the oil separators will help hold the oil in the compressor. And so they have a lot lower charge of oil. You're looking at 2 ounces of oil, 1.5 ounces of oil, 3 ounces of oil. So if you get an oil spec that's really low on a newer vehicle, then it probably has a oil separator in it, and so that helps keeps the oil in the compressor. There's less oil in the system, less pressures. The compressor is easier to turn. It all basically equals better fuel economy. Oh, I almost got all these books. And so the ratio of the newer compressors with the oil separator is going to be a lot lower than 20 to 25. It could be down as low as 10% oil as far as the charge. Okay, so we're going to now take a look at this oil, and so on the used compressor, I did an experiment, and I put exactly 2 ounces of oil in it, just as a test. And so I wanted to see how much oil we got out, like how much residue of the oil really stays in there. They say there's 3 ounces of oil in that new compressor. Well, how much is really still in there that I was impatient. I only wanted to hold this thing for a couple of minutes, not 10 minutes. And so I put exactly 2 ounces of oil in this. And so I wanted to see, do I really get 2 ounces out, or do I get 1.5 ounces? So when I took this compressor off and I checked the oil the first time, I got around 3 milliliters of oil, 3 to 4 milliliters of oil. So hardly anything at all. So on my, and really if the compressor was leaking and someone charged it maybe 1 or 2 times, and they finally came to me and I replaced the compressor, then it probably had a little bit of low oil in it because of the leak, because the oil was escaping through the leak. Okay, so getting more out. We'll go back and forth. We'll try this way a little bit. Try to get out as much as we can. Back and forth, back and forth. I may have one of my students make a compressor drain table so I don't have to sit here and hold this and turn it upside down. The problem though is you have to walk it back and forth. You have all that oil in the sump of the compressor, and so. Okay, so we got that guy pretty drained, and then I'm going to get another tube. So this is my used compressor. Right now I see I have over 50. I have close to 60. I could tell already, but I want to be a little bit more accurate with this, and so. Okay, so I wanted you guys to see that, again, I put 2 ounces of oil in, so 60 milliliters, give or take, and I roughly got around 60 back out of it. So again, so you could trust, you sit there and you drain that oil, and so you could trust that. I put the exact amount in, I got the exact amount out. There's not a lot of oil that will just kind of hang out in your compressor after you drain it out. So the question is that I took 2 ounces, let's say for this scenario, I took 2 ounces out of the old compressor. I have 2 ounces in the new compressor, you can see old versus new, How much do I really put in this system in order to fully functional? And again, the system has 5 ounces. I definitely don't want to put 5 ounces in. We have to remember that when we're replacing a compressor, we're also probably replacing other components, a receiver dryer or a accumulator. So on this particular system, it's a TXV system. It's an H-block type of TXV system, and it has a receiver dryer. So we're replacing our receiver dryer also. Now the receiver dryer has a tube at the very bottom that's pulling the refrigerant out, and so not a lot of oil is going to stay inside here because that tube goes down to the bottom and it pulls out most of the oil. But if I look at my specification in the book, a receiver dryer, they say, will hold 1 ounce of oil. And so it's a capacity chart in the service manual. And so the capacity chart will tell us that if we're replacing this, it will hold 1 ounce of oil. So we need to put 1 ounce back in. So if I took 2 ounces out of the old compressor and I'm replacing this guy, which will hold 1 ounce, then really on this particular scenario, I should put about 3 ounces back in, which is exactly what the sticker said. And so at this point, I only have 2 ounces of oil. I need to put more oil in. And so this particular oil is an ND8 oil. And so then I would want to put, again, 3 ounces of oil in, which is roughly 90 milliliters. So there's my 90 milliliters. So I'm going to put 90 milliliters back in the new compressor. And so that's my old oil, my new oil. And so when I put this in, I'm going to put it in the suction port, because the suction port is, again, I can see the sump down there. I can see that swash plate moving back and forth when I turn my my input hub. And so in that smaller port right there. And so I'm just going to pour this in the suction port. And the chart in the book talks about how if the condenser gets replaced, well, that will hold about 1 ounce of oil, and the evaporator will hold 2 ounces of oil. And if the line breaks, the line blows on you, well, that's actually 1.5. So you have to add 1.5 ounces of oil on that. Now we're ready to put the new cover, or the old cover, swap the old cover back to the new compressor, and make sure I have it on correctly. And there's a gasket that I need to put in there, so the kit comes with a gasket, so we'll put that gasket on also. I wanted to give you a second scenario or a different method to determine how much oil should go back in that new compressor. And so here we got the service manual opened up to the AC component refrigerant oil capacity chart. So you can see the chart here for this particular vehicle and how the total system holds 5 ounces of oil. So let's say that you bought that new compressor from a Dodge dealership and it had 5 ounces of oil in it. Well, you don't want to put 5 ounces back in because that's going to be too much. The compressor that we took off the vehicle had 3 milliliters of oil. So, that's far from full capacity at that point because of the leak in the system. So how you would use this chart is that the evaporator is still going to have 2 ounces of oil in it, and the condenser is still going to have 1 ounce of oil retained in it. So really there's 3 ounces in that system. And so we're replacing the receiver dryer. And so what you would do is that you would drain out the 3 ounces that is currently still in the system, the 2 from the evaporator and the 1 from the condenser. So you would drain out that total 5 ounces of oil, and you would put 2 back in it. Because why? Well, there's 3 ounces of oil still in the system. 1 in the condenser and 1 in the evaporator. And so again, this is how you use this capacity chart. Again, you can see that if a line was blown, then you would put 1.5 ounces back in. Again, you're not replacing the compressor or anything like that. If you were replacing the receiver dryer along with that blown line, well, you would then put in 2.5 ounces of oil back in the system because of these two scenarios right here. I have the new manifold on, or the old manifold, the used manifold on the new compressor. So I did that. I did want to mention that this is the old gasket. But anyway, you want to make sure that you lubricate the new gasket with PAG oil. So you have lots of PAG oil all around from draining it. And so you want to take and coat any O-ring or anything like that with fresh PAG oil when you put it back on to help seal it. One of the things that I'm doing right now is that I have my compressor sitting with the hub down, and that's to lubricate that input shaft seal. So you keep it lubricated. You set it down for 2 or 3 minutes is fine. I normally set it down after I'm done doing something with it, and as I'm cleaning up or getting ready to do something, it makes it like this for 10 minutes, which is fine. One of the things I want to do before I put my compressor on the vehicle is I do want to do some very basic checks just to make sure that this is a good system. And so one of the things I'm going to do is I got an ohmmeter, a fluke here, and I'm measuring the clutch resistance. And so it's 3.7 ohms of resistance, which should be between 3 to 4 ohms of resistance. You hate to spend an hour installing this compressor, adding refrigerant to the system just to come up with that this particular system, even though the compressor is good, the clutch could have a problem. So I do know that it's good. The other thing that I like to do with this, and I'm going to leave this hooked up while I'm doing other things, and I'll talk, is that I also want to check my clutch clearance to make sure that my clutch clearance is good on that. And so unfortunately though, with this particular hub design, the hub is recessed into the pulley, meaning I can't get a feeder gauge down in there to measure clutch clearance correctly. And so on this particular design hub, I just wanted to show you, since I happen to have this, is that in order to do that, it's pretty easy to do it while it's on the bench, a lot harder to do it on a car. So sometimes I'll do it now just so I am out. But I'm going to take a dial indicator and set it up on there. And what I do with my battery pack, grab my battery pack. But, I keep battery packs around to jumpstart vehicles. But anyway, I'm going to jumper this clutch and make sure that my clutch clearance is good. When you jumper any type of clutch, you want to make sure that you're jumpering it with the correct polarity, that you're putting positive to the positive wire. And I didn't ever think that was a big deal, but I remember in a Chrysler training class that technicians were jumpering the clutches on the new LX series vehicles, the new style, 300s with the Hemi in it, so this was early 2000. But anyway, they were blowing the Zener diode in the clutch. They were actually shorting them out by reverse polarity the two wires going to the clutch, which normally you have a bidirectional Zener diode. So if you hook it up, positive, negative, negative to positive, it works both ways. Well, on that system, it only worked one way. So I kind of tell students, it's best to keep positive and positive and negative, just in case you don't have a bidirectional Zener diode, you just have a single directional Zener diode. But anyway, if I take a look at that and go back and forth with that a couple of times, the spec is 14 to 26. And I typically tell my students, around 20,000. If I don't know the spec, I'm going to say, hey, it's around 20,000. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to zero this out and see what happens here. And that way you guys can see it. So right on 0. And again, got my jumper wire here, and I'm going to protect it. And you go back and forth. And so, as long as it's between 14 to 26, which it's, my guess is that it's around 20 right there. But hey, the clearance is good. It's not too loose, it's not too tight. It's just right. Okay. Next thing I want to talk a little bit about is that, all the oil that you have, that all your AC oil, what do you do with your AC oil when you're done with it? I drain the oil out of the used compressor. Where do I dump it? Do I put it down the drain? Do I put it in the oil container? And the answer is no, don't do that. PAG oil is synthetic oil. It is not mineral based, so it's a true synthetic oil. It's a base oil group 5. Category, if you're into that type of stuff. But anyway, what I do is I end up having my own AC bucket of oil, used AC oil, and I figure it's going to be 50 years before I fill this thing up as far as the amount of compressors we do here at the university. But we do 5 or 6 of them a year probably with students' vehicles. So the bottom line is that don't put it in your used motor oil, don't put it in coolant, have a separate container for it, and then when it gets full, then you're supposed to dispose of it properly. Another thing I want to talk about is that once this compressor is on the vehicle, I do want to take and I want to turn this hub. You typically sit there and you turn this thing, a little bit. I would say turn it, 10, 20 times in order to pump all that oil that you have in the system. Maybe it gets pumped into the lines and so forth. And so I'm sitting here and I'm turning this thing and making sure that I don't have any problems with all that oil. And so make sure you turn it in the correct direction, the rotation. Okay. The next thing is that when you have it all hooked up and you have it all charged up and you have the everything wired up correctly and you start the system up, while it's still in the shop, you want to burnish the clutch. And so I remember they, going back with my Chrysler days, they would say that this clutch, brand spanking new, if it's brand spanking new, only has about 20% of its clutch holding capacity. So the example would be is that you turn the AC on, the AC clicks on one time, you test it out, you do all your validations, you make sure everything is fine, and then you park the car out in the hot summer sun where it gets to 130 degrees inside that car. Well, what's the first thing the owner is going to do when they get in that car? They're going to turn it on, max AC, and on that hot of a day, maybe stop and go traffic, pressures could get up quite high, and so the key is that when an extreme condition like this, that a brand new clutch may not have enough holding capacity on 300 psi of high side pressure, and it starts to slip. So what you want to do is that the engine is cold, it's not warmed up, and hopefully it's a little bit cooler in your shop. You're in a shaded area. That you burnish the clutch when the pressures aren't real high. So you turn the system off, you turn the system off. So what do you say? 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off. And you do that about 20 times. And by doing that, you're burnishing the clutch. You're taking all that glaze off that clutch, and you're breaking it in just like you would, a rotor doing a brake job, or maybe even a manual clutch. You do the same thing. You would break it in before you start going and doing the neutral slams at a very high RPM, right? And that's clutch replacement. So now we're going to take this thing and we're going to install it in the vehicle. This is Scott Norman. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you're looking for more automotive educational videos, you can visit my Professor Pintane YouTube channel. I'm on Facebook, and also I have a website. Just look for professorpintane.com for automotive education information. Thank you very much. You guys have a good day.